we're very fortunate that we have a number of very experienced practitioners who can talk about their experience in this area. So with no further ado, I will start.
We do have quite an interesting experience of working with Nefco, and I'm very glad that they actually expanded their operations to financial institutions as well. If you want to create some kind of considerable fleet of electric vehicles, you have to create a significant amount of fast charging points in the country. Quite a unique business model, especially for Belarus.
Our basic philosophy is actually, if we want a real grand transition, a green transition from dark coal energy to green energy, we need to lower the cost of energy to a level where it's actually compatible with other sources of energy. If we're going to have the green transition in a big scale, we need to lower the price of green energy. We cannot depend on the governments paying an extra price to have green energy. So we have taken on the task of lowering the price, the cost of getting the green energy out there. And our aim is always to end up in a situation where we can compete with coal, gas, or any normal ways of providing electricity.
Black carbon is the product of incomplete combustion, and of course that's an energy source now, burning biomass, burning diesel, burning fuels that create both air pollution and is very climate forcing, in addition to the CO2 emissions that comes out. The problem is, of course, poverty. I just look at the SDGs you have on the wall here. So it's also an equity issue. Many of the pollution of especially black carbon is linked sometimes to lack of alternatives. So what we see to scale this up, in addition to the CO2 emissions on the bigger energy systems, is of course strong political leadership and public decisions to support the switch. We also see the innovation in industries and businesses, such as some of them here at the table, to find the pollution. You mentioned the cost issue. Of course, many times people use what's available to them in terms of affordability. We should also look at the other climate forcers, and there is where the financing opportunities also lay: methane, black carbon, and HFCs.
We developed a technology to make methanol, which is a fuel and also a very important base chemical, from renewable electricity, which we use to make hydrogen, and carbon dioxide, which we then combine into this single molecule of methanol. Renewable methanol can address the issue of decarbonization, because by reutilizing CO2 emissions from industry, or in the future also absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere, we can treat this liquid as an energy carrier for a renewable energy and introduce it into parts of mobility, for example, that are not very easily electrified. We've been around for 12 years, and we're maybe a very good example of companies that have to take careful steps, always going in the right direction, and then finally you get to take the bigger leaps. And that is when both the public and private partnerships become very, very important. This is a problem that we all need to solve together, both private and public. And the public institutions, their role is really to set the boundaries and the rules of the game and the incentives most appropriately. We are sort of at the earlier stages of those types of innovations, but the technologies are already pretty well laid out. Our technology, for example, is a good example where we have already been working at this for 12 years. We've demonstrated at industrial scale that we can utilize carbon dioxide in this industrial way to basically create an artificial leaf, so to speak. Our plants are consuming renewable energy and consuming CO2, and we're turning out energy which can be used by cars to drive around totally carbon-free. And you know, if we work together with industry that emits these gases, and if we work together with the energy industry that provides the renewable energy, we can really do a lot very soon.
We are working on improving of energy efficiency in public sector of our city. We implement energy saving projects in schools, hospitals, and so on. According to the agreement, Nefco allocated 5 million euros Kyiv city 2 million of euros, and 1.5 million was allocated by the E5P fund as a grant money. For this money, projects were implemented in Kyiv public buildings, which affected more than 200 schools and kindergartens in our city. As a new project, it was difficult. It have some gaps and political and financial, because we have to prove the efficiency of this project. We have to speak to our officials, to administration, to deputies, and we have to explain them why we have to borrow this money, how we will return this money, and how we see all this project at all. With organizations like Nefco, we can do big, complex projects.
We are doing small and medium-sized projects, which I think is a very urgent need in order to scale up things. You have to start small and scale up. And this is an example where we are scaling up ourselves. I think we have renovated 400 buildings so far in Ukraine. We have working in 80 municipalities and have 130 projects. And so far, we have affected the life of 170,000 kids. These small steps can actually add up to big implementation. Then, of course, we do cooperate with our larger colleagues in the MDB world, like the EBRD and EIB and so forth, to scale up and do even larger projects.
Maybe you could say a little bit about what Nefco is doing in this space in terms of mobilizing more private sector capital, given that we're talking about scaling.
In a sense, you have two avenues. One is sort of the public side, which we work in, which is of course important for any country to improve the infrastructure. But I think that's necessary in order for the private sector to come in. And I do believe that we at Nefco fill a niche. I think it's important to have these sort of smaller projects for smaller companies or smaller financial institutions and so forth to do small things. You never really know what's going to work. You need to have a diversity of projects.
I think this whole concept of small and medium-sized projects is very important, and we see that a lot of the development financial institutions have much larger ticket sizes, and there is a role, a niche, and as we've seen, that niche is being fulfilled in Ukraine, Belarus, and other country contexts.
When we enter a new market, we need to know that we can create an impact that matters. We want to be making a difference in that particular market, and that's especially in terms of lowering the price. And from a lower price, you can actually start to scale up. Especially Ukraine is a very good example of that. But without the small projects, we will never get any scale, of course, especially in countries like Ukraine.
And therefore we also need clarity and vision going forward, because our investors are really asking for that. They want to say, if we're investing in a 15-year or 20-year asset, then we also need to know what the regulations are going to be 15 to 20 years ahead. We are learning by doing. Time is very short. If we believe in the IPCC's latest reports, we have actually much less time than we thought we had. And we know that if we postpone solutions, then it will become more expensive.
Public buildings is a big area and untapped potential also in the EU as well. And we've been struggling with rolling out the concept of the energy service company, the ESCOs. Is there much experience in Ukraine of the ESCOs? Do you see an opportunity for ESCOs going forward?
The ESCO was the part of this project with Nefco, and we show this positive experience. Then we work with legislation by the Kyiv City State Administration, and now this year we signed more than 100 ESCO contracts.
So my advice is to do a project and then do it small enough so you sort of manage your risk, and then take the challenges that you meet and try to move on those.
So you have to change your mindset, really. People are under the perception that actually there's a lot of carbon capture already in place, but it's actually very, very small amounts that are captured. The rest just goes into the atmosphere unabated. As soon as the infrastructure is in place for carbon capture, then companies with innovative technologies can plug into that infrastructure, so to speak, and start using that resource.
Much more detail, this concept of the circular economy. And if there are opportunities that you can use the waste products like the exhaust gases or byproducts of other industrial processes and utilize those in the same area, maybe in an industrial park or so forth, then I think there's a lot of greenhouse gases to be saved there and a lot of resource efficiency to be had. So thank you very much, one and all. Thank you.